Sarah Williams walked through the busy halls of Atlanta General Hospital, her colorful scrubs making her stand out among the white walls. At 32 years old, she had already made a name for herself as one of the most dedicated physical therapists in the facility. Her colleagues often joked that she spent more time with her patients than at her own home, but Sarah didn't mind. Helping people recover and regain their strength was more than just a job to her, it was her calling. On this particular Tuesday morning, Sarah checked her schedule and noticed a new patient had been added to her list. James Cooper, 35, automobile accident survivor, she read from the file. According to the notes, he had been transferred from another hospital and was starting his rehabilitation journey all over again. The rehabilitation room was quiet when Sarah entered. She found James sitting in his wheelchair, staring out the large window that overlooked the hospital garden. Unlike many patients she had met who carried their frustration like a heavy cloud, James turned to greet her with a warm smile that reached his eyes. "Good morning," he said, his voice carrying a gentle southern drawl. "You must be Miss Williams. They told me you're the best therapist in Atlanta." Sarah couldn't help but laugh. "Please, call me Sarah, and I think the other therapists might disagree with that assessment." She pulled up a chair to sit at eye level with him, something she always did with her patients to make conversations more comfortable. As Sarah began her initial assessment, she learned that James had been a high school music teacher before the accident. 3 years ago, a drunk driver had hit his car, leaving him with severe injuries to his lower body. He had made progress at his previous hospital, but had to relocate to Atlanta for his sister's wedding. "So you're stuck with me now," he joked, watching as Sarah tested his leg mobility. What struck Sarah most wasn't James's physical condition. She had worked with many patients with similar injuries. It was his attitude that caught her attention. While explaining his previous therapy routine, he sprinkled in funny stories about his students and spoke about future plans as if his wheelchair was just a temporary inconvenience. "You know what I miss most?" James said during their session. "Teaching my students how to dance for prom. Every year, I hold special classes for those who have two left feet." Sarah looked up from where she was working on his leg exercises. "You taught dancing too?" "Sure did. Everything from waltz to hip hop. Those kids were terrible at first, but by prom night, they'd be gliding across the floor like professionals." His eyes sparkled with the memory. The 1 hour session flew by quickly. As Sarah helped James with the final stretches, she noticed how he pushed himself to do just a little more each time, never complaining about the discomfort she knew he must be feeling. "Same time Thursday?" he asked as she wrote notes in his file. "Actually," Sarah replied, checking her schedule, "I have an opening tomorrow afternoon if you'd like to start intensive therapy sooner rather than later." James's face lit up. "Miss Williams, are you suggesting we see each other more often? Because my mama taught me that a gentleman should at least buy a lady dinner first." Sarah felt her cheeks warm slightly, but she kept her professional composure. "Well, Mr. Cooper, let's focus on getting you back on your feet first. Then we can discuss proper Southern etiquette." As she watched James wheel himself out of the therapy room, Sarah had a strange feeling that this patient was going to be different. She had always maintained strict professional boundaries with her patients, but something about James's genuine spirit and determination touched her heart in a way she hadn't expected. Later that evening, as Sarah filled out her patient reports, she found herself spending extra time on James's file. She drew up a detailed rehabilitation plan, one that would challenge him, but also build on his existing progress. What she didn't know then was that this was just the beginning of a journey that would change both their lives forever. In the hospital cafeteria that evening, Sarah's colleague Mary noticed her distraction. "Earth to Sarah, you've been stirring that coffee for 5 minutes straight." Sarah snapped out of her thoughts with a smile. "Just thinking about a new patient's therapy plan," she said, not ready to admit that it was James' warm smile and unwavering optimism that kept replaying in her mind. Over the next 3 months, Sarah and James's therapy sessions became the highlight of both their days. While other patients came and went, James remained consistent, working harder than anyone Sarah had ever treated. His dedication was inspiring, and soon other therapists and patients started noticing the special energy between them. One rainy afternoon, Sarah was surprised to find James waiting in the therapy room 15 minutes early, holding 2 cups of coffee from the hospital cafe. I noticed you always drink coffee during your afternoon breaks, he said, extending one cup to her. I hope you like caramel flavor. The cafe lady said it's your favorite. Sarah accepted the coffee with a smile, trying to ignore the butterflies in her stomach. Thank you, James. But you really didn't have to. I know, he replied, his eyes twinkling. But I wanted to. Plus, I have something to show you. James reached into his backpack and pulled out a tablet. He pressed play on a video, and suddenly the room filled with the sound of teenagers laughing and music. It was a recording from his last year of teaching, showing him leading a group of awkward high school students through dance steps. See, I wasn't making up those dance classes, he grinned. Sarah watched, fascinated by the way James in the video moved with such grace and patience, helping nervous teenagers find their rhythm. The man in the video was the same person she knew now, full of joy and determination, even if his circumstances had changed. Their professional relationship began to shift that day. During therapy sessions, they started sharing more about their lives. Sarah told him about growing up in Atlanta with her three sisters, and James shared stories about his small-town childhood in Georgia. They discovered they both loved old Motown music and could quote entire episodes of The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. However, not everyone was supportive of their growing friendship. One day, Sarah overheard two nurses whispering in the break room. Did you see how she looks at that disabled patient? One said. It's not professional. And honestly, what kind of future could they have? Sarah felt her face burn with anger, but before she could respond, she heard Mary's voice. The kind of future where two people care about each other despite what narrow-minded people think. That evening, Sarah stayed late at work, troubled by the nurse's comments. She was organizing files when James wheeled into her office. You missed our afternoon session, he said softly. That's not like you. Sarah looked up, feeling guilty. I'm sorry, James. I just had a lot on my mind. James wheeled closer to her desk. Is it because of what those nurses said? Yeah, word travels fast around here. Sarah sighed, putting down her files. Does it bother you? What people might think or say? Sarah, James said, his voice serious for once. I've spent 3 years learning that what other people think doesn't matter. What matters is what's in here. He tapped his chest. And in here, I know that meeting you was the best thing that's happened to me since my accident. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. James, Let me finish, he continued. I know I'm your patient. I know there are rules and boundaries. But in 2 weeks, my therapy here will be complete. I'll be transferring to outpatient care with Dr. Johnson. And when that happens, I'd like to take you to dinner. Not as your patient, but as a man who thinks you're the most amazing woman he's ever met. Sarah felt her heart racing. Everything she'd been feeling but trying to ignore came rushing to the surface. Are you sure? This won't be easy. People will talk. James laughed. People already talk. Let them. I'd rather give them something worth talking about. Just then, the evening janitor walked by, forcing them both to remember where they were. Sarah quickly wiped her eyes and stood up straight. 2 weeks, she said with a small smile. Let's get through these last sessions first. Yes, ma'am, James replied, saluting playfully as he wheeled toward the door. Just so you know, I make a mean chicken pot pie, something to look forward to. As Sarah watched him leave, she realized that sometimes the biggest barriers weren't physical ones, but the ones people put up in their minds. And maybe, just maybe, breaking through those barriers was worth all the whispers and stares in the world. 6 months had passed since Sarah and James's first dinner date. That evening had turned into many more, and their love grew stronger with each passing day. While James continued his outpatient therapy with Dr. Johnson, he and Sarah spent their free time exploring Atlanta together, discovering shared passions, and building a life that defied others' expectations. On a bright Saturday morning in April, James called Sarah with an unusual request. Can you meet me at the Atlanta Botanical Gardens at 2 p.m.? He asked, his voice sounding nervous over the phone. There's a special exhibition I want to show you. Sarah agreed, though she found it strange that James seemed so anxious about a simple garden visit. When she arrived at the gardens, she was surprised to find James's sister Emma waiting at the entrance instead of James. He asked me to give you this, Emma said with a mysterious smile, handing Sarah a white envelope. Inside was a handwritten note in James' neat handwriting. Follow the yellow roses. Each one has a memory we've shared. J. Sarah looked up to see a path lined with yellow roses, her favorite flowers. At the first rose, there was a small card. This is where we had our first picnic. You laughed when I told you I learned to cook just to impress you. Walking further, she found another rose and another memory. Remember when we got caught in the rain here? You said you always wanted to dance in the rain, so we did. My wheelchair got stuck in the mud, but you said it was worth it. Each rose led to another, and each card held another precious memory. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes as she read about their first kiss, their Sunday morning coffee rituals, and the time they stayed up all night talking about their dreams. The path led her to the garden centerpiece, a beautiful gazebo surrounded by a sea of yellow roses. There, in his wheelchair, sat James, wearing a sharp blue suit and the biggest smile she had ever seen. "Sarah Williams," he said as she approached, his voice full of emotion. "When I first met you, I thought my life was defined by what I couldn't do. But you showed me that life is about what we can do, about the love we share, and the dreams we dare to chase." To Sarah's amazement, James slowly began to rise from his wheelchair. Months of intense physical therapy had allowed him to stand for short periods, something he had kept secret from her. With the help of a cane, he stood before her, shaking slightly but determined. "I've been practicing this for weeks," he said, reaching into his pocket, "because I wanted to do this the right way." Sarah gasped as James carefully lowered himself onto one knee, pulling out a small velvet box. "Sarah, my beautiful Sarah," he continued, his voice trembling with emotion. "You never saw my wheelchair as a barrier. You saw me, just me. You loved me not despite my challenges, but with them, through them, and sometimes because of them." He opened the box, revealing a vintage-style ring with a small diamond surrounded by yellow sapphires. "This was my grandmother's ring. She told me to save it for someone extraordinary, someone who could see the beauty in life's imperfect moments." By now, tears were flowing freely down Sarah's cheeks. Through her tears, she noticed movement in the garden. Their families emerged from behind the flowers. Her parents, sisters, James's parents, and his siblings, all watching with joy and anticipation. "So, Sarah Williams," James said, looking up at her with eyes full of love, "would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Will you marry me, wheelchair and all, and continue making every day an adventure?" Sarah dropped to her knees beside him, not caring about her dress getting dirty. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Their families erupted in cheers and applause as James slipped the ring onto her finger. Sarah helped him back into his wheelchair, and they shared a kiss that promised a lifetime of love and understanding. Later that evening, as their family celebrated at James's house, Sarah sat beside her new fiancé, admiring how the ring caught the light. "You know," James said softly, "this is just the beginning of our surprises." Sarah looked at him curiously, but he just smiled, keeping his secret about an even bigger surprise he was planning for their wedding day. The months following the proposal were filled with excitement, planning, and a few challenges that tested Sarah and James's relationship. Every weekend brought new decisions to make, from venue selections to flower arrangements, from music choices to menu tastings. One sunny morning, Sarah sat at her kitchen table surrounded by wedding magazines and color swatches. She was trying to decide between different shades of yellow. James' aunt had insisted they incorporate his grandmother's favorite color into the wedding theme, when her phone buzzed with a message from James. "Running late for our cake tasting. Physical therapy session going longer than expected. Love you." Sarah found it strange. James had been having more therapy sessions lately, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week. When she asked about it, he would smile and say, "Just trying to stay strong for our big day." But something in his voice made her wonder if there was more to the story. Later that afternoon, at the bakery, Sarah noticed James seemed tired but unusually excited. His hands trembled slightly as he fed her a piece of lemon cake, but his eyes sparkled with a secret joy she couldn't quite understand. "James Cooper," she said, wiping frosting from his chin, "what are you up to?" He caught her hand and kissed it. "Can't a man just be happy about marrying the most beautiful woman in Atlanta?" Their wedding planner, Monica, interrupted them with questions about the reception hall layout. "Now, we need to discuss the dance floor arrangements," she said, pulling out her tablet. Sarah saw James exchange a quick glance with Monica, and the planner quickly changed the subject to table settings. This wasn't the first time Sarah had noticed such mysterious behavior. Last week, she had walked into her office at the hospital to find Dr. Johnson, James's physical therapist, quickly ending a conversation with her fiancé. That evening, while James was in the shower, Sarah's curiosity got the better of her. She noticed his journal, the one he had been keeping since their first meeting, lying open on his bedside table. She knew she shouldn't look, but a page caught her eye. Day 156 of Secret Project Wedding. Managed to stand for 3 whole minutes today. Dr. Johnson says we're making progress, but time is running out. Sarah almost caught me practicing today. Had to pretend I was just stretching. The pain is worth it. I can't wait to see her face when... The sound of the bathroom door opening made Sarah quickly step away from the journal. Her heart was racing with questions, but she forced herself to act normal as James wheeled into the bedroom. "Everything okay, honey?" he asked, noticing her flushed face. "Just wedding jitters," she lied, feeling guilty about peeking at his journal. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Sarah's sisters took her shopping for her wedding dress, a beautiful ivory gown that made their mother cry when she tried it on. James's family hosted a huge engagement party where his students from his teaching days surprised them with a musical performance. But through it all, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something big was brewing. She noticed how James's arms seemed stronger, how he'd sometimes grip his wheelchair arms as if practicing to push himself up. Once, she caught him watching videos about wedding dances when he thought she wasn't looking. One night, just 3 weeks before the wedding, Sarah found James sitting in their backyard, staring at the stars. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders. "I was just thinking about our first dance," he said softly. "I want it to be perfect for you." Sarah knelt beside his wheelchair. "James, every moment with you is perfect. We don't need to do anything special. Just being with you is enough." James touched her cheek gently. "You've always seen the best in me, Sarah. That's why I want to give you the best of me on our wedding day." Something in his voice made Sarah's heart skip a beat, but she decided not to press further. Whatever surprise James was planning, she knew it came from a place of pure love. As she helped him back inside, James whispered, "3 more weeks, my love. Just 3 more weeks." The wedding day dawned bright and clear, with sunlight streaming through the windows of Sarah's childhood home. She had decided to follow tradition and spend the night before her wedding in her old bedroom, surrounded by photographs and memories of her youth. At 6 a.m., Sarah's sisters burst into her room with coffee and excitement. "Wake up, Sleeping Beauty," her oldest sister Lisa called out. "It's your big day." Sarah opened her eyes, butterflies already dancing in her stomach. The first thing she did was check her phone. There was a message from James sent at midnight. "By this time tomorrow, you'll be Mrs. Cooper. I can't wait to show you what love can do. See you at the altar, my beautiful bride." The message made her smile, but also added to the mystery that had been building over the past months. This morning, everything felt different. There was unusual activity around the house, with people coming and going, whispering conversations that stopped when she entered rooms. "Lisa," Sarah called out as her sister arranged the makeup supplies. "Have you heard from James this morning?" "Oh, he's busy with wedding stuff," Lisa answered, avoiding eye contact. "Don't worry about him. Let's focus on making you beautiful." Sarah's mother entered with breakfast, but barely touched her own food as she kept checking her phone. When it buzzed, she quickly stepped out of the room to take the call, speaking in hushed tones. "Is everything okay?" Sarah asked when she returned. "Is there a problem with the wedding?" "Everything is perfect, sweetheart," her mother assured her, but her eyes were suspiciously bright with unshed tears. "Just perfect." The morning passed in a blur of activity. The hairdresser worked her magic, transforming Sarah's braids into an elegant updo decorated with small yellow roses. James's surprise addition to her bridal look. The makeup artist gave her a natural glow that made her brown skin luminous. As Sarah slipped into her wedding dress, she heard more commotion downstairs. Through her window, she saw Dr. Johnson, James's physical therapist, hurrying into the house. A few minutes later, she heard him talking with her father in the hallway. "Everything is ready at the church," Dr. Johnson was saying. "James has been, well, you'll see." Sarah tried to peek out her door, but her sisters quickly pulled her back. "No eavesdropping on your wedding day," they teased, but their nervous excitement was palpable. Around noon, Sarah's father came to see her, stopping in the doorway with tears in his eyes. "Baby girl," he whispered, "you look like an angel." Sarah smoothed her dress nervously. "Daddy, what's going on? Everyone's acting so strange today." Her father took her hands in his. "Sometimes, love makes people do extraordinary things," he said cryptically. "James, that young man loves you more than I've ever seen anyone love another person. Just remember that when you get to the church." Before Sarah could question him further, her bridesmaids arrived, all wearing the sunny yellow dresses they had chosen together. They carried bouquets of white and yellow roses, matching the flowers in Sarah's hair. "The cars are here," someone called from downstairs. As they helped Sarah down the stairs, she noticed more unusual activity. Her brother-in-law was loading what looked like medical equipment into one of the cars, quickly covering it with blankets when he saw her. In the bridal car, Sarah sat between her mother and Lisa, her heart pounding with anticipation and curiosity. They passed James's parents' car on the way to the church, and she could have sworn she saw what looked like parallel bars in their trunk. "Mom," Sarah said, clutching her bouquet, "please tell me what's happening. Is James okay?" Her mother squeezed her hand. "Oh, honey, he's more than okay. He's about to show you and everyone else just how far a person will go for love." As their car approached the church, Sarah saw a crowd of people hurrying inside. Among them was James' entire physical therapy team, carrying bags and equipment. "Just remember to breathe," Lisa whispered, fixing Sarah's veil. "And remember that sometimes the best gifts come as complete surprises." The church bells rang softly as Sarah's car pulled up to the entrance. Through the stained glass windows, she could see shadows moving inside, and the sound of excited whispers reached her ears. Her father opened the car door, extending his hand to help her out. "Ready, baby girl?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Sarah took a deep breath, smoothing her wedding dress one last time. The ivory fabric sparkled in the afternoon sun, and her yellow and white rose bouquet trembled slightly in her hands. As she stood at the church entrance, she noticed something unusual. There seemed to be extra space cleared around the altar area. "The music's about to start," her mother whispered, quickly hugging her before hurrying inside to take her seat. Sarah's bridesmaids lined up in front of her, their yellow dresses creating a sunny pathway. Her youngest sister, Angela, the last bridesmaid in line, turned and squeezed her hand. "Remember," she whispered with a mysterious smile, "no matter what happens in there, just keep walking toward James." The church doors opened wide, and the first notes of "At Last," their chosen wedding song, filled the air. One by one, her bridesmaids began their walk down the aisle. Through the doorway, Sarah could see the church was packed. James's former students filled several rows, and all of his physical therapy team sat together near the front. Finally, it was her turn. Sarah's father tucked her arm into his, and they stepped into the doorway. The congregation rose to their feet, and a collective gasp filled the church as they saw her. But Sarah barely noticed. Her eyes were fixed on the altar, where James waited in his wheelchair. He looked handsome in his black tuxedo, with a yellow rose boutonniere matching her bouquet. His eyes locked with hers, and the love she saw there made her knees weak. But there was something else in his expression too: anticipation, nervousness, and excitement all mixed together. As Sarah began her walk down the aisle, she noticed more unusual details. Dr. Johnson stood very close to James's wheelchair, and what looked like hidden support bars were carefully disguised with flowers on either side of where James sat. James's brother Michael stood next to him, looking tense and ready, as if waiting for something. The walk felt both eternal and too short. With each step, Sarah's heart beat faster. She passed rows of smiling faces, some already dabbing at tears, but many wearing expressions of excited anticipation. James's mother sat in the front row, clutching a handkerchief and nodding encouragingly at her son. When Sarah reached the altar, her father kissed her cheek and placed her hand in James's outstretched one. His palm was warm and slightly sweaty, unusual for James, who was always calm and collected. "You look beautiful," James whispered, his voice shaking with emotion. The pastor stepped forward and began the ceremony. "Dearly beloved," he said, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Sarah Williams and James Cooper. Their love story reminds us that true love knows no boundaries, and that with faith and determination, anything is possible." Sarah noticed James take a deep breath at these words, squeezing her hand tighter. The pastor continued with the ceremony, but Sarah could feel a building tension in the church, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something. They reached the part where they would exchange their vows. The pastor turned to James first, but instead of immediately beginning his vows, James looked up at Sarah with determination in his eyes. "Before I say my vows," he said, his voice carrying through the church, "I want to show you what love can do, what you've inspired me to do." Dr. Johnson stepped forward, and Michael moved closer to his brother's wheelchair. The congregation sat forward in their seats. Sarah's heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. "Sarah," James said, gripping the carefully hidden support bars beside his wheelchair, "you've shown me that love can break any barrier. Now let me show you what your love has helped me accomplish." The church fell completely silent. Even the birds outside seemed to pause their singing. Every eye was fixed on James as he placed his hands firmly on the support bars, and Sarah realized that the moment everyone had been preparing for was about to happen. Time seemed to stand still in the church as James gripped the support bars. With determination etched on his face, he began to push himself up from his wheelchair. Dr. Johnson stood close by, ready to help if needed, but James shook his head slightly. He wanted to do this on his own. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth as she watched her soon-to-be husband slowly rise from the wheelchair he had used since they first met. The congregation held their collective breath. Some people were already crying, others were recording the moment on their phones, but everyone was completely silent. James's arms shook with effort as he straightened them against the bars. His legs, strengthened by months of secret therapy sessions, gradually took his weight. Sweat beaded on his forehead, but his eyes never left Sarah's face. Inch by inch, he rose until he was standing at his full height of 6 feet. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered through her tears. "Oh my God, James." The church erupted in applause and cheers, but James wasn't done yet. With careful, practiced movements, he took his hands off the support bars. Dr. Johnson quickly removed them, leaving James standing independently before his bride. "Sarah," James said, his voice thick with emotion, "for the past 6 months, I've been working toward this moment. Every extra therapy session, every time I said I was busy, every mysterious appointment, it was all for this. I wanted to stand before God and our families and look into your eyes as I make you my wife." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she realized the magnitude of what James had accomplished. All those secret meetings, the whispered conversations, the extra therapy sessions, everything made sense now. "The doctors said I might never stand again," James continued, his voice growing stronger. "But they didn't know about the power of love. Your love, Sarah, gave me the strength to push beyond what anyone thought was possible." The pastor, who had been in on the surprise all along, stepped forward with a box of tissues for Sarah. Her makeup was running, but she didn't care. Her heart was so full of love and pride for the man standing before her that nothing else mattered. James's mother sobbed openly in the front row, while his father beamed with pride. Sarah's family was equally emotional, her sisters holding on to each other as they watched the miraculous moment unfold. "I promised you surprises," James said with a small smile, "but I'm not done yet." He nodded to the church organist, who began playing the familiar tune, "Can't Help Falling in Love," the song that had been playing during their first kiss. With trembling but determined steps, James closed the small distance between them. The physical therapy team watched anxiously, but their months of work had paid off. James's movements were slow but steady as he took Sarah's hands in his. "Now," he said, looking into her eyes, "I can properly do this." He lifted her hands to his lips and kissed them softly. "Sarah Williams, I love you more than life itself. Will you accept these vows from a man who stands before you, body, heart, and soul?" The church was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Sarah, overwhelmed with emotion, could barely speak through her tears, but she managed to whisper, "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." The pastor stepped forward again, smiling broadly. "Well, I think we can all agree that this is a moment none of us will ever forget. Shall we proceed with the vows?" As they exchanged their wedding vows, James remained standing, though Sarah could see the effort it took. His legs trembled slightly, but his voice was strong and clear as he promised to love, honor, and cherish her for all the days of his life. When the pastor finally pronounced them husband and wife, James took Sarah's face in his hands and kissed her. The church erupted in the loudest applause yet, with people standing, cheering, and wiping away tears. "I love you, Mrs. Cooper," James whispered against her lips. "I love you too," Sarah replied, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. "You amazing, wonderful man." As they turned to face their guests as husband and wife, James leaned close to her ear and whispered, "Just wait until you see what I've planned for our first dance." The wedding reception was held in a beautifully decorated ballroom at the Atlanta Grand Hotel. Yellow and white roses covered every table, and soft lighting created a magical atmosphere. But the real magic was yet to come, and everyone knew it. As guests enjoyed their dinner, they kept glancing at the empty dance floor. The DJ's announcement of the first dance was met with immediate silence as everyone turned their attention to the newlyweds. Sarah sat next to James, who had returned to his wheelchair after the ceremony to conserve his strength. "Ladies and gentlemen," the DJ announced, "please welcome Mr. and Mrs. Cooper for their first dance as husband and wife." James wheeled himself to the center of the dance floor with Sarah walking beside him, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. The opening notes of "At Last" by Etta James filled the room, the same song Sarah had walked down the aisle to, but this time with a special purpose. "Ready for one more surprise?" James asked, looking up at his wife with a mischievous smile. Dr. Johnson and Michael stepped forward again, but this time they weren't alone. James's entire physical therapy team positioned themselves discreetly around the dance floor. This time, when James stood up, he did it with practiced ease, though Sarah could still see the concentration on his face. "For 3 months," James said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I've been practicing this dance. Every step, every turn, all for this moment." He took Sarah's hand in his and placed his other hand on her waist. The crowd gasped as James began to lead Sarah in a slow, gentle dance. They moved together in perfect harmony, just as James had once taught his students to do. "I can't believe you did all this," Sarah whispered as they swayed to the music. "How did you manage to keep it secret?" James smiled, carefully guiding her through a slow turn. "Everyone helped, your family, my family, the hospital staff. Even your sister Angela helped me practice when you thought she was taking extra nursing shifts." Tears of joy rolled down Sarah's cheeks as they continued to dance. James's movements were careful and measured, but he never faltered. The months of secret practice had paid off, and they moved as one across the dance floor. Their guests watched in awe, many recording the moment on their phones. James's former students huddled together, crying happy tears as they watched their beloved teacher dance again. The physical therapy team stood proudly, witnessing the culmination of their hard work and dedication. As the song came to an end, James pulled Sarah close and whispered, "I have one last surprise." With that, he slowly dipped her, a move they had never practiced, but one he had been determined to perfect. The room erupted in cheers and applause. When the dance ended, both families rushed to the dance floor. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. James's mother hugged them both, unable to speak through her tears. Sarah's father shook James's hand before pulling him into a tight embrace. "Son," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I've never been prouder to welcome someone into our family." Later in the evening, as guests danced and celebrated around them, Sarah and James sat together, taking in the joy of their perfect day. James had returned to his wheelchair, but his triumph was evident in his beaming smile. "You know," Sarah said, squeezing his hand, "when I first fell in love with you, it was never about whether you could walk or dance. I fell in love with your heart, your determination, your spirit." "I know," James replied, bringing her hand to his lips. "But I wanted to show everyone that love really can move mountains, or in my case, help a man stand up and dance with his bride." A small group of children from the hospital where Sarah worked approached their table. One little girl in a wheelchair looked at James with wonder in her eyes. "Dr. Sarah," she said, "does this mean anything is possible?" James leaned forward in his chair. "Yes, sweetheart, it does. With love, determination, and people who believe in you, anything is possible." As the reception continued into the night, Sarah and James's story spread through social media. Local news stations picked up the story, and soon their wedding video went viral. But for Sarah and James, the greatest triumph wasn't in the standing or the dancing. It was in showing the world that love knows no boundaries, and that with enough faith and determination, miracles can happen. Their wedding day marked not just the beginning of their marriage, but the start of a new chapter in their lives. Together, they planned to share their story and inspire others, proving that true love can overcome any obstacle, break any barrier, and make dreams come true.